Okay, so while we try to get all our presenters together, I think I can use already the time to welcome all of you who are joining our third online seminar, Methodologies for Dialogue Process Design and Environmental Risk Assessment in Conflict-Affected Scenarios. Thanks to all of you who have stayed on from the past seminar and also to all who've joined us right now. We are now complete, as we can see. Antonio Solarte and also Alicia Castillos and Hector have just joined again, which is very great. My name is Katharina Löhr. As most of you are aware by now, I'm working at the Leibniz Institute or Center for Agricultural Landscape Research and also at Humboldt University of Berlin. And together with my colleague Camilo, also from ZALF, we will be facilitating this online seminar. Camilo is raising his hand just to say hello. Yes, okay, that's good. Some technical matters before we get started is that we will have 3 presentations followed by joint question and answer session, and we really invite you to put comments or questions into the dashboard so we can collect them throughout the online seminar and then have them responded to by the presenters. And with this online seminar, we're trying to put a more practical perspective, highlighting also challenges when working on natural resource management in conflict-affected scenarios. And we will first begin with a more technical perspective on how to balance the use of natural resources in conflict-affected environments before we turn to a more macro or more socioeconomic perspective on different approaches and methods that can be used to work with stakeholders, thereby hopefully also facilitating or fostering higher levels of cooperation and trust building. And with this, I would like to directly introduce our 3 speakers to you, and I'm hoping that my slide is changing its screen now. Let's see what happens. Here you should now be able to see names and titles of the presentations. We have Antonio Solarte, who is currently a researcher at the Center for Research on Sustainable Agriculture, CPAF, in Colombia, and he is professionally trained in tropical animal production with a master's degree from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and a doctorate degree from the National University of Colombia. He is currently working on research and rural development projects that develop sustainable agriculture production systems with an emphasis on livestock as well as conservation of biodiversity and ecosystem services in agroecosystems and agricultural landscapes. Antonio, we are very happy to have you here and looking forward to your talk in very few seconds. Antonio's speech will be followed by Alicia Bustillos-Adaya, who has just defended her dissertation for a PhD degree at the University of Bonn. Her research project focused on the state of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and was conducted in support of the Center for Development Research, ZEF, in Bonn, and the Institute for Technology and Resource Management in the Tropics and Subtropics, ITT, in Cologne. Alicia has an agriculture engineer degree from Zamorano University in Honduras and also a master's degree in technology and natural resource management from the Applied Sciences University Cologne. Her work focuses on interdisciplinary approaches for disaster risk reduction and disaster risk governance, many words, in the mountainous regions. And Alicia, thank you very much for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to your talk, which will actually follow the talk by Hector, who should not be the speaker number 3 again. So Hector will do the second talk, and Hector Morales is also a researcher at Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research and a PhD candidate at Humboldt Universität Berlin, with a focus on the nexus of sustainable land use systems, food security, and peace-building indicators. He's a political scientist with a master's degree from LSE in London and many years of practical work experience on governance, migration, and peace building in international organizations, such as the German organization GIZ and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And with this, I kindly invite Antonio to share his screen and to give us his presentation on the experience and challenges in the development of sustainable agriculture production systems. Antonio, the floor is yours, and I thank you for being here. Okay, there is the presentation. We will just get a full screen by Antonio in a very few seconds, and then we can start with the first presentation.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you perfectly, and we can already see your presentation.
Okay, and you hear me well? Okay, let me see.
Okay. Now we just left the presentation again, Antonio.
Okay, thank you.
Now it's back. Yes, perfect. Thanks, Antonio. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, today I'm going to talk about the experience of ZEF and in Caquetá, Colombia, developing sustainable agricultural production systems, mainly based in cattle ranching. For me, I am lucky because in the previous webinar, you heard about a SLAS project and also about the Caquetá region. So it's an advantage for me. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I'm going to talk about the context of Caquetá, Colombia a little bit, and then the challenge that we face to work on the land use and deforestation. Then experiences about the approach that we use to establish sustainable land use systems for livestock. And at the end, I'm going to highlight some key elements for intervention on SLAS projects. I'm part of the SLAS project that we developed together with ZEF and also ZALF. And I'm going to talk from the practical perspective, working with the farmers on Caquetá in this moment. Caquetá is in the south part of Colombia. You are located close to the eastern Andes mountains, and in the interface with the Amazon plants. So this is an important region in the country with a very special characteristic. The rainfall is more than 3,000 millimeters per year. The soils has low productivity because are very acid with aluminum, high contents of aluminum, which means a low productivity for most of the crops. This area is important also, right? Because connects the Amazon with the Andes, and for these reasons we have more than 29 different ecosystems in this area, which means also high biological diversity and different ecosystem services. Part of the Amazon River basin comes from this area because we have big rivers as Caquetá, Putumayo, and other big ones that supply the water to the Amazon River. Also, we have indigenous communities and different populated centers in this region. The region is one with the highest deforestation rates in Colombia, and the local communities have been affected by the armed conflict and illegal economies from illegal crops. So this is a model and an illustration based on several pictures in which I want to show you what happened in the territory in this issue of the change in the land use to increase the agricultural frontier. Most of the region is suitable for forest conservation due to the environmental restrictions and the the soil types, but the region was colonized in the 50s and 60s, and now it has a severe process of deforestation. Okay, the process started with the illegal logging, the burning of the vegetation to establish pastures as a way to occupy the land. This is the normal process. The people, the colonizers, first take out the valuable good, and then use fire to remove vegetation, and then to plant pasture as a way to occupy the land. Sometimes are lands that belong to protected areas in that region. After that, the agricultural production systems established are illicit crops in some areas, so also cattle ranches. But the land is suitable for conservation of agroforestry systems. So we have here a conflict for the use of land that finished in different environmental problems, land degradation, low productivity of this productive system that make that the colonizers should move forward to colonize other areas and to increase in this way the agricultural frontier. So this is a cycle process that I want to show here with these images. So sorry, this is in Spanish, but it's just to show that most of deforestation in Colombia occurs in this Piedmont of the Andes, most in Caquetá and Meta departments. So we are located in an area with a high deforestation rates, despite that the rate locked down a little bit last year, and in 2018 was near 200,000 hectares. But most is in the region. There are 2 or 3 municipalities here that concentrate most of the deforestation area. This cattle inventory in the Department of Caquetá show us how is being used the land for cattle. After the signature of peace agreement, the population of heads of cattle in Caquetá increased almost 1 million of heads up to this moment. So it means that the land is being used for cattle in a very low productive systems, because the investment for those productive systems is very low, and because that the degradation of the land occurs and the carrying capacity and the technical parameters of this productive system is low. So because of this, we have been working in the different projects the last decade, more or less, and we have established some approaches and principles to develop a more sustainable type of cattle ranching in the area. Of course, we are not promoting cattle in the area, but we need to manage the productive system that the farmers have in the region. So this approach works first at 2 scales: first a farm scale, and then to landscape scale. In this approach, we used to identify in the farms the areas with high biodiversity and high ecosystem services that should be conserved. Then also the areas that should be restored by different means, and do the sustainable intensification of the use of the land in the productive system, in this case cattle ranching, in certain areas. So in this interface, we can try to manage a plan of the land use for a farm and landscape scale that maintain the ecosystem services and conserve areas, that key areas within the region. The knowledge the dialogue between the local producers and technicians is very important because this is a very complex ecosystems that have many particularities. And the main aim of this kind of land use planning is the family welfare. So this is also a way to address problems of climate adaptation because through the ecosystem services, improving ecosystem services, we can also adapt to climate change. Okay, there are certain principles that we have established to establish this agro-silvopastoral system. The first one is to preserve and restore the natural capital and biodiversity that we have in the farms. As I mean, to preserve what still is in the area and to improve it, and then to produce high biomass crops as a basis for to produce animal feed and food security for people in different types of combinations, and then to integrate crops and animals production as a complementary activities, to recycle agricultural residues and manure for production of fertilizer and renewable sources of energy. In this case, I'm showing here a biodigester to produce biogas, and the use of low-cost materials to build up infrastructure for animals or for the different production systems. And last but not least, promote and maintain wellness and organization strategies for both the family and the community as a basis to get all of these in the field. So there is a tool that we have been using in different projects, that is ecological swaps, as a way to preserve or conserve wetlands and forests. In this case, we can see this example with one wetland. This wetland was before included as a grazing area, and to this ecological swap, we established with the farmer a voluntary agreement to protect the wetland and also this patch of forest. And as a reward, he had investment in the agricultural system. In this case, a grazing area with trees, divided with trees to improve the cattle ranch. So also the sustainable intensification is based in agro-silvopastoral system. In this case, agro-silvopastoral system means to integrate in the same unit of area agriculture, forestry, and livestock components as a way to do a good use of the soil and the natural resources, and based in the principles of ecological intensification. That means to use the functions of the ecosystems to produce food, fiber, energy, and environmental services. There are different alternatives for sustainable land use systems for livestock. Here I had some examples. It can be agro-silvopastoral strips, natural regeneration as a way to produce areas for grazing without cut down the trees. Another possibility could be the establishment of other banks to feed animals and to supplement strategically in certain times of the years. Also, the live fences as a mechanism to avoid the use of these poles for fencing, the protection of wetlands and restoration, and also the patch of forest. So there are different alternatives that we can establish with the farmers in a management plan. These alternatives can be combined also at landscape scale. I have here an example of how if we have 2 or 3 farms in a region, we can have a forest conservation and restoration in some areas. In other, we can have wetland and water source protections and agro-silvopastoral strips, or further banks or the management of natural regeneration, or improve pasture in other areas, and a strip of trees to divide the paddock. So there are different possibilities to make a land use planning a scale more beyond of the farm. Finally, I put here some key elements that we have been using to develop sustainable land use system. The first one is to focus the areas of intervention through ecosystem or social criteria, because it is more difficult if we develop projects with a scattered farms in all the territory. So we can try to concentrate the interventions, and also the interventions should be done through local grassroots organizations as a way to improve the local organization at the grassroots scale. The selection of producers also should be done according to pre-established criteria. Sometimes we need see issues related with land tenure of management of the farm, or to identify conservation areas. And the intervention should consider intervention at farm and also at landscape scales. The voluntary conservation agreements have been used as a tool to promote conservation of areas, and it is important to develop with the farmers a comprehensive land use planning, including the elements that I showed before as conservation, restoration, and ecological intensification. And the alternatives should be co-designed together with farmers for sustainable production and also for conservation, because restoration and production need to be based on the local capacities of people. A farm management should be established, and it should be followed with some indicators that show us that we are advancing in the right direction, and also build local capacity to the producers, and the organization is a key element also to promote this sustainable management of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Thanks for this great presentation and all the illustrations, which make everything very visible and graspable. Thanks a lot. And I would ask Hector then to share his screen, and while he does, I also invite all of you again to put your comments or questions, so we can also structure them a little or give to the different presenters so they can prepare. But now we are already seeing Hector's screen, which is great, so we will just wait that he puts it on full screen, and then we can dive into his presentation on integrative conflict transformation. So Hector, thanks very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Thank you, Antonio, for the great presentation. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more on the social side, and I'm going to present a methodology for handle unexpected consequences, and a methodology for dialogue process design. So if you are in Colombia or a Colombian or interested in Colombia, you probably have seen this picture. So this is the clear example of an unintended consequence. The government puts a measure to promote more commerce, and by taking out the VAT tax, and people went out in mass to buy even during a pandemic. So I'm pretty sure the government didn't want this to happen, even though they didn't take into account the unintended consequences. So I'm going to present an approach that has been developed in the aid and development organizations and projects that is called the Do No Harm approach, and then I will try to make a transition into the integrative conflict transformation by presenting a case study that I worked on in Colombia almost 6 years ago. So yes, the do no harm approach, as I said before, it has already been implemented in many projects from aid and development institutions, and the logic behind is that even when you are trying to do good or to deliver a good for social purposes, you can make more harm than good. So the approach presents 7 steps. It's very important to analyze the context. So in order to make an analysis of the context, you have to identify dividers and connectors. And dividers are sources of tension or division in a society, also known as local capacities for war. And on the positive side, there is connectors. So there are connectors. So it's factors that bring people and groups together and can also build bridges. Also, this approach identifies possible patterns of impact. So there could be unintended consequences, but there are also some previsible impacts. So, and these are drawn within the what are the goods and services that an organization is transmitting to the context that could either increase or decrease equality and security in the context, and the how, the mechanisms used to transmit these goods and services that could affect either the dividers or enhance the connectors. And since in conflict affected scenarios, and I'm pretty sure Antonio and all the people that are working on the field know that the context is always changing, you have to adapt. So there are always options to redesign in order to enhance the connectors and diminish the dividers. Yeah, so this is the do no harm approach, and I present this because this is something that is an approach for conflict sensitivity implementation in projects before digging into peace building and conflict transformation. So conflict transformation is a concept that is defined by the glossary of Berhoff, that is a foundation here in Germany, as a complex process of constructively changing relationships, attitudes, behaviors, interests, and discourses in violence-prone conflict settings. And also it tries to address the underlying structures, the root causes of conflicts, taking into account also the cultural aspects and the political aspects. So I'm going to present this case in order to see how it could be the operationalization of the integrative conflict transformation. So imagine that you are a victim of the conflict and you've been forcibly displaced because of the conflict. You had to leave the land, and you are waiting for a program to recover your land or to resettle in another piece of land. So this happened in Colombia in 2016. There was a set of families that were waiting for a program to restore the land, and they actually got new land. But when they got into the land, they were put together with other families in a community or collective title of land, and the land was already degraded, and there was no access to water or electricity, and they face a lot of conflicts within the families because they have cultural differences. So again, an unintended consequence. And the land that they had was actually previously owned by a narco-trafficant. So it was a good piece of land at the beginning, but it was already so degraded that the families were living in this land for 2 or 3 years, and it was a great challenge for them to keep up with the taxes and the livelihoods. And they could also not sell because they could not have an individual title, but a collective title. So in this case, there was a judicial law that was claiming that they need proper conditions for this resettlement. So the institutions need to answer. And some of the institutions and a practitioner on the field, they asked the GATE Colombia to facilitate a dialogue process between the community that lost all hope or all trust in the institutions, and the government institutions that wanted to restore their rights to access properly the land. So this integrative conflict transformation method implies 3 steps at the beginning, that is exploration, analysis, and design, and then implementing a dialogue process. And it works by focusing separately with the stakeholders involved in the conflict, trying to increase empathy among the actors and to understand their main goals and all the emotions that are not on the surface but that are behind, and then to prepare them separately to engage in a dialogue process collaboratively. So the dialogue process design starts with putting together a facilitation group. So in this case, it was integrated by a local facilitator from the municipality that knew the community, but also knew the history of the institutional actions and why this happened. And then there was the Inspector General Office for the people in Colombia, is like the Procuraduría. And also there was part of this facilitation group, an official from the unit of victims and the GATE local advisors. So the group leads the exploration and analysis in order to design a dialogue process by meeting bilaterally with the different stakeholders in order to gather information and to invite them and engage them in the process. And then for this, several tools can be used, but also a stakeholder mapping exercise within the facilitator groups was conducted in order to understand the relationships between the different actors involved in this situation. So the integrative conflict transformation has 3 steps. So first, understanding the goals in order to build trust. So you ask separately to the actors what is the conflict about and how it began in the past. Then a second step is to differentiate the goals in order to promote empathy. So you want to dig deeper into what happened, what solutions were tried, and what is going to come next in the future. And then you put the actors together and try to promote integrative solutions that integrate the goals among the stakeholders. So in this case, we first, in order to understand the goals and build trust among the parties, we developed with the community 1 workshop separately, where we used a methodology that is called the River of Life in order to understand the history. It's like a timeline, drawing a timeline to understand the history of the conflict, why they were displaced, what happened when they got relocated, poorly relocated, and what were the basic needs. Then we conducted another workshop with the government separately, and we brought some of the results of the previous workshop, and also try to understand what was the historic institutional actions of aid that was given by the community, what it didn't work. Then we conducted a second set of workshops in order to promote empathy. So again, we brought some of the responses from the government to the community, and then we implemented a methodology that is called the theater of the oppressed, that I think many of the attendees know. That is a role play exercise in order to wake up some analytical empathy. So the community, the families were acting as decision makers. There was a situation being put where there was low resources and they need to respond to many people with low resources. Then afterwards, we did the same with the institutional actors, and we also added an exercise to coordinate the institutional response, because this was one of the main issues that we identified, that there was not a coordinated response from the institutional actors. And finally, we conducted a dialogue where we try to integrate the goals to promote creative solutions. It was not easy. It was a challenge at the time, but at the end there was an agreement where a working plan with a set of priorities that were addressing the most pressure needs at the moment were put in order. It is very important to know that the agreement was all then monitored by the prosecutor office, so to say, for the Inspector General's office. It's hard to translate the role of the Procuraduría. It's like a control organism within the Colombian government. So lessons learned from this dialogue process is that the building dialogue process with full awareness interacts pretty well with the context, and it promotes changes at several levels. So for example, at the individual level, there was capacity building for the victims and the institutions in skills to negotiate and tools to address a problem. At the community level, there was social cohesion because there was cooperation among peers. So there was not only the conflict between the communities and the institutions, but also conflicts within the families that were living in this collective land, and conflicts with, among the institutions. So this brought social cohesion among peers, and then trying to look for solutions. And at the institutional levels, it was portrayed this do no harm approach, and also the importance of coordination. And at a political level, this is a legitimization of an integrative approach for giving compensation for victims. It's not only needed that you give land to the victims affected by the conflict, but also socioeconomic stabilization. So granting livelihoods, granting social services, it has to be a comprehensive approach. And about solving a conflict situation, it's very important to have a facilitator when a conflict is stagnated, and also trying to use local facilitators that know that somehow keep a neutral role. This is also a challenge to maintain, but the most important is that when there are projects that are being implemented on the field and the implementator leaves the situation, then this bridge is broken somehow. So it's important to involve the local actors that stay in the territory to grant sustainability. And also, as a recommendation, it's important to use tools for context analysis to analyze conflicts in several dimensions. So at the community level, but also to integrate the institutional network and integrate political economy into the analysis, etc. Yeah, this is pretty much it. There are some references in the PDF. You can see some videos in Spanish of the process of this practice. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hector. Thanks for your presentation and to introduce this transformative approach to us. And while Alicia is now getting ready, I just want to thank all who've already started putting questions, and I want to kindly ask all of you to put questions that are rather brief, because it's a bit difficult to put long explanations to the presenters and to all who are listening. So maybe while Alicia is opening her screen, I can just put first question already to the speakers. Maybe Antonia first address the question if land use planning can reduce impact on climate change, and if the agriculture border declaration reduced deforestation in Colombia. So there is some questions to think about, but we are now already seeing Alicia's presentation still with a notes mode. So maybe you want to change your setting to the one slide only, and then I will give you the floor to hear all about the participatory mapping and georeferencing together with participants. We are still seeing it in the moment. Now it's perfect. Yes. Thanks, Alicia. Okay. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will talk more into the tools and methodologies for participatory approaches. The case I have is actually in the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, in the mountainous area. Those are 3 municipalities, Teresópolis, Nova Friburgo, and Petrópolis, that are together located in the mountainous region. And the conflict here is more related about natural resources and risk. There is a lot of landslides because it's in the mountainous area. There is a lot of landslides and flash floods going on there. I will introduce a little bit of the study case and study area and go directly to methods for assessment and how to adapt existing tools and how to use the results. So it's going to be very technical. The good thing is that our colleague did a good introduction into governance and the importance of participation in governance, if you were in the second webinar. But just to give an outlook, what is important about the governance is, and as they spoke, this inclusive governance, to bring in more people in the whole governance process, to improve the involvement of stakeholders, improve communication, and these both could improve greatly trust, and this would lead to more effective planning tools that enable communities to organize effective risk management on the basis of self-organizing units. So this is what I did for my PhD research, and this is in giving this importance to the stakeholder involvement and the communication among them. I was trying to develop tools and methodologies to try to involve as many people as possible, and try to use these results in a productive way. So what happens after a disaster event? I will go quickly on this because we all are having problems in time. So what happened in 2011 is there were a lot of flash floods and landslides. You can see this comparison picture. All these cars here are landslides that happened in January of 2011, and after a very heavy rain event. So you had 7 cities affected, a lot of deaths, a lot of people left homeless, and many more affected people. Because of this, a lot of projects started to happen at national, state, municipal level, talking about reconstruction, more infrastructure projects, creating more bridges and reconstruction buildings, etc. Relocation projects that we talked a lot about relocation projects and the problems they may bring. And there was an alert system created for the environmental agency. You had first aid and response courses for the community and new urban and development plans. So there was a whole new development plan for the municipality going on at the municipal level. And there was a whole institutional rearrangement. So this specific event triggered a lot of projects and also showed a lot of barriers in terms of corruption and bureaucracy and the mistrust there is between institutions and the civil society. It's excessive bureaucracy for recovery processes, overlapping activities between institutions and organizations, the lack of horizontal and vertical coordination, the lack of communication, this very clear top-down risk management that was very hierarchical, misuse authority and power, where only expert knowledge was valid, and a lot of individual reactions that were egalitarian, fatalistic, and hierarchical also. So here you have a big conflict, and very complex because you have institutions at different levels. You have actors in different parts of different projects trying to build up on the other, and a lot of barriers coming up from them. So to assess, there was also all these institutions, for instance, the environmental agency and civil defense, they have developed some strategies to involve the population a little bit more, to put them to create, for instance, an alert system that alert the population at once per SMS. And the website was updated. There was a series of strategies developed that the population were not really following. And on the other hand, they were creating alternative initiatives, like they were creating groups in WhatsApp. They were creating social media groups in Facebook, for instance, and community-based monitoring and mapping. So you could see that there was a big contrast between what was applied by the institutions and what was initiated by local population. This was part of a questionnaire that I did on the field, and you could see how there were two approaches to the same for the same purpose. You could also see in terms of all inclusive process that were laid by the institutions, that the state and regional participatory projects were very they had more authority and power, more communication intensity, and less participant when it was about the state. And it was much more participants at the municipal and local level, but they had less authority and power and less communication and decision mode. So this triangle that is actually developed by Funk shows how hard it is to have the best combination, which is a lot of participants with a lot of authority and power and with a lot of communication and decision mode. So whenever you have, especially in this case, when you have more authority and power, you have less participants creating these decisions, doing these decisions, and being able to decide on different processes at regional, at state, or municipal level. So what I did on the field, it was to integrate methodologies, which I think is very important, because we already heard in the other presentations how important it is to have individual communication and group communication. So we had the interviews and the questionnaires to get quantifiable information, and as the one we saw already, interviews to get deeper on specific subject and aspects and conflict that may arise, and then try to put different neighborhoods together in focus groups, where you would talk to the population living in risk areas. And then in another layer was the participatory workshops that was trying to put together the people living in risk areas and all the institutions working on those risk areas, and of course always together with participant observation and literature review. I think the mixture of all these methodologies can give you a better overview on what's going on in a specific place, and can help you to understand individually and in groups what are the dynamics in a certain context. So to go directly to the tools, what I did in the focus groups, for instance, it was targeting both populations. So when I was doing the questionnaires and the interviews, that was door to door, I was inviting them to the focus groups, and kind of inviting them to participate. We were creating timelines and mapping, and talking a lot about future and planning in the specific neighborhood or the location. So this was very interesting, because we were kind of trying to talk about everything for a start, and then we are going specifically to the risk, to the participatory mapping, and to have more specific data. So for instance, the timelines were a very good, not only as an icebreaker, but it's a good dynamic to see what's happening in the neighborhood. So everyone was starting on a paper sheet and collaborating with a little bit of the data they need about when they arrive to the neighborhood, when the banks, the churches, the schools appear, and they have these nice tokens to put on the dates they needed. So this was already giving a lot of information, but it was more information to share among them. What I did with the participatory maps is to take not a blank sheet, but a sheet where the rivers, the houses, and the streets were already painted, and then give them some material like tokens and strings to work with and say, okay, I live here, this is the gas station, this is the school, this is the cemetery, this is a bakery, and so they can build on what they have, first with specific things, and then with more abstract things like the risk area, which was what I was interested in. And then you could put cultivation and where does some kind of contamination sources come for the river, for instance, or industry that pollutes somehow, or whether you have pesticides, or whether you have. So this tool was very, very interesting. It was helping them a lot, and this modification of not giving them just a blank sheet of paper and a pen, but something that was already pre-built for them to recognize and to play with was really helping the population to participate more. And the most important thing is once you have this map, you could digitalize everything and make it comparable. So at the end, what I could do with the results was to take the state maps, the municipal maps, and what I had on the focus groups, and compare them in quantify them and compare them. So you could had a map like this where you have, this is just an example for the risk area, the flood risk area, and you can compare specific territories according to the state, according to the municipality, and according to the participatory risk maps. And quantifying this information was very interesting because you see that the focus groups were having a result just between the results of the municipality and the results of the state in terms of area on the risk. And in terms of evacuation points, this is another example. You have always one per neighborhood, which was what civil defense was giving, just one random evacuation point. But then you have the opinion of the people living in the risk areas, which were telling you which are the real evacuation points possible that are really safe and where they would go, and they have enough space for more people. So you have a much more richer approach in terms of evacuation points. And this is only two examples of two items that you can get. You can have much more information. I just put these two examples, but you have location places where the pollution comes, places where the relocations are, distance to hospitals, to schools, and etc., etc. And what this does is actually creates a collaboration between what is created officially by the state and the municipality, and what you can gain from a participatory mapping. So details on the specific location, social aspects, and validation that could support the state and the municipal modeling. So the main challenges on this was only an example. If you want to know about more specific or other aspects, I will be glad to answer them. But we have, like, I think, a problem with time now. And just to shortly talk about the main challenges, the first one and biggest one was the participation of the population. Talking about availability, of course, they have to work and they have lives, and the willingness to participate in the different focus groups and the incentives. So you had to have incentives in long and short term. Short term, of course, giving them offering lunch or a nice place to do this. In some cases, if you have the resources, you can even pay them. I didn't have them, so I had to work with lunch and other kinds of small incentives. And the long-term incentives, and this is the big one, is how much is this participation going to collaborate in their actual governance. So for them, sometimes they participate in a lot of especially after these events, you had a lot of organizations coming here in this location and try to ask them questions, make them taking information from them, and they need a long-term incentive that tells them, okay, this information that you are creating, it's going to be available somehow, or it's going to decide in this or in this term. So I think that's one of the most important incentives that will increase the participation of the population. And of course, in terms of availability, is of course to look a slot to where the most of the people can participate. Technology access is also one challenge. So if you have, I didn't have the computer or any access to electricity in some of the locations, so I need to work. This is why I had to deal with big sheets of paper and work with the tokens. So it's something that they can understand and easily work with. Communication tools, I was asking in the interviews about their emails, and nobody was using emails, and then you have to change with the timeline and say, okay, WhatsApp is the best communication tool in this specific scenario. So we were creating WhatsApp groups for every location in order to arrange a better date and a better location. And about the results, it has to be clear from the beginning how the results will be handled, what is the purpose of them, and clarity on when the results are going to be presented back to the population. So I had a feedback on the workshops I was presenting after every focus group, every year, sorry. And also a web page where you can upload the whole information, and they have the digitalized version of their own maps. So there are a lot of challenges to deal with. If you have any further question, I will be glad to go deeper in any of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alicia. Thanks to all of you for the great presentations and all these very practical insights into the implementation of sustainable land use systems and working together with various stakeholder groups. I'm trying to share my screen. I've just did, and I also asked all presenters to put on their cameras so that we can spend still some minutes for question and answers. And one question I've already put to the front earlier on goes to Antonio, who could maybe start by responding to that question, but also one more, which I will also introduce now. The one question, Antonio, related to the question if land use planning can reduce the impact on climate change, and if the agricultural border degradation reduced deforestation. And perhaps, I'm very sorry to throw all ones at you, I can also repeat it again. There was the question, what happens to the conservation agreements after the completion of projects or after the funding is cut? So maybe you can try to respond to these, and then I will throw in some more questions. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, okay. In the approach that we are following, one important point is to make a clear understanding with the farmers that the conservation of ecosystem and ecosystem services improve the whole productive system. So in that way, if they preserve, for example, the watershed that supply the water for the house or the animals, they are doing things that can help them to be better adapted to the climate change. So in the approach of the adaptation based on ecosystems, in these lines, we can say that the approach of land use planning helps farmers to be better adapted for climate change. And what happened with the project ends in these agreements, when they sign agreements about protect wetlands or forests, these areas are important of the farms because of the water supply of other non-forest resources that they use. So in the long time after the project, when the project finished, the areas have become more important each time for the farm. So in certain way, they are more conscious about the importance to preserve the areas through the agreements. And also they invest effort to restore the areas, planting trees or or preserving other trees, so they don't want to cut down all the effort that they put before in those areas.
Thank you, Antonio. Thanks for these responses. Then I have another two questions I will throw in at once, and I think they go to Hector and also Alicia. And then we will see if we have time for another one or two questions regarding time. But the one question is to both of you, Alicia and Hector, but maybe also Antonio, if you like, considering the huge power differentials that you have in such projects, did you have any trouble getting some of the key governmental institutions to the table and interacting with communities? So how do you deal with power differentials in your work? And a second question, there is also the question, looking at Colombia, what do you think are the prospects of involving state actor processes so that the relationship between state and communities improve? And peace building does not mean something that is happening on the community level, perhaps. So question on power and power relations and how to overcome them in your work.
Well, in this case, I think it's working with both sides. It's very important that both sides are working. Once in the policy making, so there have to be policies involving the population, so the population can actually make decisions on what's happening. I think this is a very, very crucial point. And on the other side is the population, the self-organized population, creating, organizing themselves and being able to build on this information that the government has. So as an example, in Brazil, it was very hard for me to get the authorities to participate in these workshops and in these events. But the good thing is the policy, at least in those years, 3-4 years ago, the policies were there that where participation was kind of an important thing, that a priority for any organization there. So the information had to be available, and any participatory process had to be considered. So you had this as a tool to work a little bit more with the governments, and I think this is crucial. And the rest is like kind of trying to find a time and a moment to get these people to participate. It was very hard for to have them all together. I never managed to have them all leaders and institution leader at the same time. But if you kind of push on them a lot, and you have to also push the population actually, you could have them in the same table at some point. But it's important to push from both sides.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. Hector, is that the same experience you had, or do you have different experience?
Definitely, power differences are there, and it's something that you need to take into account when you are designing a participatory process. So I put emphasis on designing the participatory process because, for example, if you are making an intervention on the farm level, probably the actors will have more or less the same an horizontal relation. But when you are scaling it up into governance scenarios, decision scenarios, there is mostly very vertical, as Alicia showed us. So it's really important to address this in the way you construct the dialogue, like actually the actual event. So not putting the authorities at one level in the space and then the farmers there, or also the times, everything accounts to, in order to like bring together the people into that the ideas weigh the same, because at the end it's the ideas, the solutions, and not much the show or the political decision. And of course, there's always, I hate this word, but it's also the political will. So it's very difficult to engage like the authorities when they do not have the political will. In the case that I presented, it was very important, the facilitator role, like a third party, that in this case was an international agency that was building bridges and like having a neutral position when there is an stagnated conflict. So This is crucial. And also in this case, it was very crucial that there was a sentence from a court in Colombia that was demanding solutions, and organism of control. So this was one point, but if you put it in the broader picture of consolidating peace, for sure, you cannot only work with very peaceful communities, because that is very naive. So like only working in a really small space, and then you not involve the decision makers and the institutions. And actually within the peace agreement, the spirit of the peace agreement is, or the concept is called territorial peace. So actually bringing the services of the state to the most disadvantaged populations in Colombia. So this is pretty much trying to better the way decisions are taking place, bridging the gap between breaking the gap between the regions. Like not only that someone from Bogota comes in a plane in one day and interrupts all the processes that are happening at the local level, but really empowering the local institutions. And this also has to do with a fiscal policy where at the local level you have leverage to get taxes, and private enterprises to get taxes to take their own decisions, not depending on the central level. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then I think there is one last question I would like to give to you, or actually throw at Alicia, before we then come to a close. And the question is, first, Alicia, thanks for the presentation. I live in Rio de Janeiro, and I would like to know what are best strategies to give feedback to the communities of research results. There was a question on how to transfer results then back from science to society.
Well, I was at the beginning doing that in the workshop. So every year I was going to the field and I was putting all the data together and presenting them on the workshops. But of course, the participation is not that high. I have also a website where you could actually go and see the results, the maps, so the digitalized maps. But I think the most efficient way was using the Facebook groups that were already creating, the old Facebook and WhatsApp platforms. So everything, all platforms that were already built by the community, and use them as a communication tool. I think that make the best impact of all, because people is more familiarized with that, and actually this is what they access the most, even more than emails or any given website. So, and I think that translation of the information was very important, because even institutions were working with SMS instead of WhatsApp, and with websites instead of kind of communicating that in a more friendly way, also because the translation is also very important whenever talking about communication.
Thank you. Okay, with this, I think we have taken a lot of time to hear the presentations, and also had the chance to answer some of the questions that came from all of the audience. Thank you very much once again to the presenters. Thanks also to Camilo, who is helping here with the facilitation and all the technical issues, and to all of you who've joined us today for this online seminar. Thanks a lot. We have been recording it, so in case you want to listen to certain things again, feel free to check out the website in a few days, and then you can download it there. And otherwise, I wish you all a good afternoon, good day, or good evening, and we hope to see you soon again. Bye bye, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.